Beacon had its familiar charm, even if his presence there was forced this time. It was hard to hate the walls and furnishings of a place he considered home. Laid on his bed with arms crossed beneath his head, Jaune pretended to be dozing off as he listened to the fruits of his labor. White Fang recruitment shut down in Vale? Blake read, eyes wide. Reports indicate a huntsman assault on an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district led to several White Fang supporters being captured, including evidence of intensive recruitment activities in the local area. Crow moved fast. He supposed he should have expected that. It had only been 2 days since he made that call, but the man wouldn't have let something like that slip away from him. Within their dorm room, it was just the three of them, Yang having chosen to spend her Saturday back in Patch with her father and sister, promising to be back sometime today. Beacon officially reopened on Saturday, which was why many students returned to take advantage of the free room and board. In an ideal world, it would have been better if he could have made it so that Crow found the Paladins. That would have shut down not only the Fang, but also removed some of the biggest tools in the breach. The problem was knowing when and where those were, and at what time Roman transported them to the warehouse. He'd worked for Roman, but the guy wasn't foolish enough to share that kind of information. This would have to do for now. Nice to see the local authorities are stepping up. Weiss coughed, sniffing slightly as she rubbed a tissue against her red nose. She glared at him across the room, just as a quick reminder of who she blamed for the cold. At least it wasn't as bad as yesterday, in which he felt guilty enough to be roped into fetching her meals and tea all day long. Do you think they would just ignore terrorists? Jaune asked, hiding a small smile. It sounded like such a silly notion. Yet wasn't that just what they had done? In truth, it hadn't. Ozpin, Ironwood, and the rest of their people had been keeping close tabs on the rise of the faction, but that wasn't something that had been obvious to them at the time. More importantly, it hadn't been obvious to Blake. One eye cracked open as he looked towards the Fauness, checking her reaction. Blake's eyes were wide as she continued to read the scroll, yellow eyes slowly shifting from one side of the page to the other. She looked healthy, however, no bags under her eyes or signs of exhaustion. That was a good sign. They always seemed to before, Blake whispered. More likely they were compiling evidence, Weiss said, trying to find out where they had to take them out in one fell swoop. An operation like that had to require some planning. Weiss had no idea how wrong she was, though that could be forgiven since Crow was a bit of a crazy one when it came to be a huntsman. Most likely he just burst into the warehouse, slamming everyone in his way aside as he made sure Ruby wasn't there. Or maybe he checked before and found out she was okay. He could half imagine the man just going there for his niece's scroll. Guess I'll find out when Yang and Ruby come back. Jaune's scroll beeped once, his eyes watching it with a bored expression. Aren't you going to read that? Weiss demanded, and the tone of voice she used said she would if he didn't. Yes, dear. He sighed, picking it up and ignoring her splattering. The message was from Galinda, or Miss Goodwitch as most terrified students called her, and sadly, it was not the long-awaited ballroom call he'd been dreaming of. What is it? Mandatory meetings with Dr. Oblek. Jaune held the cool metal against his forehead, releasing a short sigh. He'd forgotten all about them. He could skip, but then Miss Goodwitch would come and collect him again. It wasn't like they would disappear either. Oblek was patient and insistent. He would just keep adding to them. What for? Weiss pushed herself up on her bed, still in her pajamas with one hand on her pillow. She clutched a warm blanket to herself, wrapping it around one shoulder. We've been back in Beacon for less than a day. What could you have possibly done? Why do you assume I've done anything at all? Weiss and Blake stared at him. Ouch. Talk about faith. Neither of them relented in their stares. Okay, fine. There was something arranged before we broke up last term. It's not detentions. So, what is it? Just talks, Jaune said, turning onto his side and away from them. About philosophy, Jaune drawled. About the sanctity of human life. He could hear Weiss pause, no doubt trying to come to grips with what he said. There was no way he was going to let them know the truth of what the matter was, especially since it wasn't anything to worry about. The teachers feared he was going to go insane from grief, self-doubt, or guilt. The usual problems someone might face after their first kill. The rules didn't apply to him. He'd been doing this for centuries. Maybe it had hurt, once upon a time. But if so, then the memory was so far back as to have been forgotten. A yawn threatened to break free, only to be stuffed into his pillow. "Guess who's back?" Yang screamed, slamming the door to their room open. Yay. Jaune cheered limply, holding one arm up when it became clear no one else was going to speak. "You guys suck." Yang sighed, her footfalls echoing across the floor as she lowered her bag against the bed. "Seriously, no energy whatsoever? But I brought something that might change that." This was new. He didn't think Yang ever bothered to bring something. Blake cried out in shock, while Weiss gasped in joy. As filled with cold as that sounded, Jaune turned over to have a look, chuckling slightly to himself when he saw what had caused all the commotion. "Ah," Jaune thought to himself. "That." "Woof! You brought a dog?" Blake hissed, scooting back into her bed and looking around in panic. It only occurred to him that they hadn't made bunk beds in the room. It never bothered him since Juniper hadn't either. But right now the fact seemed a problem to Blake. The corgi, noticing movement, ran over to investigate, placing its paws on the edge of the bed and wiggling its stubby tail towards her. "Back!" the fauna shooed. "Go away!" "His name is Zui." Yang grinned, ignoring her partner's plight. "He's my dad's dog, but he said I could bring him here when we asked. It's even in the school rules. I checked." "He can't stay here," Blake shouted. "Tell her, Weiss. We can't have a dog in the dorm." Ah, poor, innocent Blake. She probably thought the heiress, even a stickler for the rules, would be on her side in the matter. Jaune knew better. "Oh, he's so adorable," the white-haired girl gushed, sitting on the floor on her hands and knees as she rubbed Z's stomach. "He's a good boy. You are. Yes, you are." "Weiss!" Blake looked betrayed. "Looks like Weiss is all for Team Jazzberry," Yang teased, pronouncing it J-Bewiz, as though making them all cringe. "Jaune won't be," Blake said confidently. Jaune leaned back, not daring to blink as he suddenly came under the gaze of three very dangerous sets of eyes. Oh look, there was the instant "agree with me now" gaze of Blake, the "if you dare to disagree with me" expression from Weiss, and the "how could you do such a thing" eyes from Yang. He was saved from answering by a pair of paws tapping on his leg. Zui looked up at him, black eyes impossibly loving. He even tilted his head to the side, one ear flopping against his skull. "Jaune?" someone whispered. He ignored it, reaching down to place his arm beneath Zui's forelegs. The dog kicked with his back ones, pushing his way up the trouser legs so that he could turn around in Jaune's lap 3 times, settling down with a plop. It was impossible to stop the smile which sped across his face as he stroked the dog's soft fur. "Good boy," he whispered, grinning as the corgi yawned and rested its head on his thigh, dozing off. He was so warm and soft. Jaune couldn't help but keep stroking him. That was, until he realized there was complete silence in the room. "What?" He looked at his 3 teammates. "What's wrong?" "It's just odd," Weiss said, "to see you smiling like that, patting a little dog." "You look happy," Blake added. I like dogs," Jaune said, cradling the small pup in his lap. "Zui seems to like you too." Yang grinned, bouncing on her feet. "Yes! That means he gets to stay." "Yay." Blake sighed, unwillingly echoing his early sarcasm. Jaune chuckled, leaving them to their chatter, even ignoring the looks he could feel them sending him. Zui had woken up from the noise and was now yawning, scratching its ear lightly before pushing itself further into his stomach. The corgi shuffled a little as Jaune shifted, depositing it on his sheets as he climbed underneath to sleep, before slumber claimed him as he felt the corgi moved, trundling over to curl up against his back. Jaune couldn't help but smile. Well, looked like he was being relegated to the role of the little spoon. It wasn't a position he was used to, but he'd let it go this time. Osmond sipped from his mug of coffee as a new day's sun shone from the windows of his tower. A new day and the start of a new term, as students moved about below, preparing for their day. Hopefully that peace could last. He would make so. The elevator door opened behind him with a quiet hiss, signaling the arrival of Galinda, but also, most curiously, of another person. "Nice view," a familiar voice rasped. Osmond smiled lightly, knowing what was coming. "Crow, it's not even 9 in the morning. Galinda snapped. "You're drinking now?" "I'm not the kind of guy to procrastinate," Crow said, holding his flask out. "Too many people wasting time hesitating or getting lost in uncertainty. I'm not one to do silly stuff like that." "I'm not sure those qualities should be applied to a vice," Osmond said, turning about to greet the man. "You're here much earlier than expected, Crow, and I don't mean because it's before noon. I'd still be outside of Vale if it wasn't for a certain someone." Crow pulled out a seat with his foot, twirling it about and sitting down on it backwards. Galinda sighed and shook her head, refusing to sit down at all. Yes," Osmond said, sitting down on a large seat. "Our new friend? I trust that the information he's provided was correct?" "Seems to be." The other man shrugged. "Then again, all he did was show me what the White Fang were already doing. Not like he had any chance to tell any lies." "Other than him being a friend?" Galinda warned. "I'm not dumb," Crow laughed. "Were you able to find out anything about him?" Osmond asked, leaning forwards. "Any signs?" "None. The ass hat blocked calls and Ruby scored to make us think he was keeping it on him. By the time I tracked the signal on it, he was long gone." Crow leaned back and waved a hand. "The thing was hidden behind some barrels. He must have planted it there when he was done." "Perhaps there's some evidence on it," Galinda suggested. "Can we see it?" Can't." Crow shrugged. "I already gave it back to me niece." "Crow, that could have had valuable I made sure to check it." He laughed. "Cool yourself. I'm no amateur. There was nothing I could find. It was a day old and covered in dust, so no prints I could make out. If the guy even forgot to wear gloves. What's more, it was dark as hell when he called, so it didn't seem much more than a mask. He didn't make any other calls either." "Curious," Osmond said, stapling his fingers together. So this friend of theirs had known exactly who it was he wanted to call. That was a dangerous fact. More so if one considered that the person apparently knew just who to get in touch with Crow. Did Miss Rose have anything to say about where she had misplaced it? "Well, she was damn well pleased I'd managed to find it." Crow looked immensely proud to have received such validation. Galinda rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed with how wrapped around his family's fingers he was. Other than that, she told me she noticed it was gone after they visited the mall to buy a gift for her friend's sister. I checked with Yang too. The story matches up and all her friends are with them at the time." "The mall?" Galinda sighed. "Literally the one place in Vale where Miss Rose could have her scroll stolen and be surrounded by possibly thousands of suspects. We have nothing to go on then." I got nothing." Crow shrugged. "We do have something." The two turned to look at him as he spoke, smiling behind his hands. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't our mysterious friend say he would contact you again?" "He did. You want me to talk with him next time?" "It cannot hurt. See what he has to offer. I trust you'll do what you can to find out more." "He had a White Fang mask on though. He could be a traitor to their cause," Galinda suggested. "It's not unusual for some faunus to become disillusioned with other methods." The woman gave him a long look, no doubt thinking of a similar student already under their protection. "A mask means little," Osmond said. "He could be a traitor. But at least it could just be easily a disguise he put on for our benefit, or simply something he used to infiltrate their ranks. Or he could still be White Fang, Crow's side, and a loyal one at that too. And leading us on, Ozpin admitted, "Yes, I realize. Ultimately, what we gained from your little raid was nothing more than a few lowly placed grunts. The White Fang would be more than willing to sacrifice them to help a spy infiltrate our ranks. Worry not. I shan't be taking any risk with this." "Are you going to tell Ironwood?" "In time." Ozpin sighed, picking up his mug. His old friend would likely find out soon enough, but for now it could wait. The last thing they needed was a heavy-handed approach to a matter so delicate. "For now, we should focus on our students. There's little more we can do until our mysterious friend contacts us again." His words were cut off by a beeping on his desk, heralding an important call. Galinda and Crow went silent, leaving him to answer it. "Yes?" Sir? There's been a bit of an incident in the cafeteria." Jaune had no idea how it came to this. "More ammunition!" Yang roared, looking to him with red eyes. He shrugged, looking around for a moment before tossing her a bowl of breadsticks. They weren't the most aerodynamic of things, but somehow she made it work. Fate had to have a hand in this. It just had to. From what he'd been able to determine, certain events just had to happen and no amount of work from him could stop them. That had been the case with Beacon and the docks, but he hardly expected it to be the same for a sodding food fight. He pulled his partner out of the way of the first piece of thrown lunch, even gone so far as to knock Yang aside too, but that had somehow just brought the blonde into the path of another. Really, it was just too late by that point. Something got into Yang's hair and then suddenly the entire room was open warfare. One loop he finally snapped and cut her damn hair short. He'd die soon after, but at least it would be revenge. "Jaune!" Why snapped, falling back behind his barrier and fixing her eyes on him. "Why aren't you helping? We're getting creamed out there." Yang laughed, nodding down to some cream splashed all over the front of Weiss's uniform. "Nice one, Weiss cream." What? No, I did it! Weiss's face twisted in horror. "Never mind. Get up and put some effort into this, you dolt." "But I'm a pacifist," Jaune whined. Weiss and Yang's glares could have frozen water solid. It didn't help matters when Blake flew overhead, launched away after trying to fight Pierre with a pair of baguettes. "I'm queen of the castle, I'm queen of the castle." Nora chanted, "We need a plan." Weiss said, huddling beside Jaune as they heard other students try and challenge Team Ruben, all with varying degrees of failure. Rushing in isn't going to accomplish anything. Jaune resisted the urge to point out whether she realized that after she rushed in and gotten covered in icing. There was a scream from behind, followed by a terrifying crack of what Jaune definitely hoped was a watermelon. They needed more than a plan. They needed a miracle. From what he could remember, the fight usually ended with Pyrrha using her semblance to launch metal cans around, only to entice Ruby into taking advantage of that with her speed. What the hell was he meant to do when they were both on the same side? "Why are you all looking at me?" Jaune asked, suddenly noticing that Yang and Weiss were waiting for him, and that Blake had dragged herself closer, her face half covered in pastry. "You're the one who comes up with the ridiculous plans to beat superior opponents," Yang pointed out. "Not that we're saying they're superior though," Weiss quickly added, "or that your underhanded plans are a good thing." Blake stared at him. Okay, sure, criticize his plans when he used them, but suddenly they wanted him to somehow fix the situation? The table they were behind shook, some white flour crushing on the top down atop their heads. Time was running out, it seemed. Plans. Most of his strategies came about not because he was some kind of genius, but because even an idiot could find an answer if they hit their heads against something enough times. He managed to find a solution to things like Roman, the docks, getting into Beacon, and even a few other things. Cinder, Adam, and the whole Vital attack was a matter as of yet unsolved, but he'd keep beating his head against it and figure it out one day. But the food fight? Had he ever actually won that? It felt like whatever team he ended up on, it was his fate to lose it. Well, fuck that! Screw fate and all the nightmares it had put him through. Weiss. He snapped, eyes narrowed. Can you cover the floor of the cafeteria in ice? No. What? His face fell. Come on! He'd only just gotten started. I don't have my weapon on me, nor do I have enough dust for that. She explained, looking down at her stained uniform. Alright. None of them had any weapons. Even if I did, the amount of power necessary to cover the entire floor in ice would be beyond me. Right. He sighed. Weiss's deficiencies aside, I got a different plan. Okay, wait. What do you mean about my deficiencies? Team Reuben forever. Pyrrha smiled at her partner's shout, the small girl holding her arms high, cherry juice spilling from cans gripped in each hand to fall like waterfalls of blood on either side of her. None dare oppose our awesomeness. The championship fighter looked out over the ruined cafeteria, seeing the truth in their leader's words. This is childish, her mind warned, but she easily buried it away. It was childish, there was no denying that, but it was fun too. There'd be no joy like this back home, no easy camaraderie and laughter. Perhaps that was worth whatever punishment lay in store for them. The Queen Spies movement! Nora yelled, making good use of her vantage point atop a tower of stacked tables. Pyrrha gripped her baguette, drawing it in before her in a defensive stance. I said, Nora huffed, the Queen Spies movement. Now, if my Royal Herald could do his job. Ren sighed. The Queen Spies movement. He passed them on, voice deadpan. Ooh, that sounded so good. Nora clapped. Be careful. Pyrrha warned her partner, the two of them stepping closer to the downed table Nora had indicated. There was no question in her mind as to who hid behind it. They wouldn't have gone down so easily. Ruby nodded, stepping to the right as Pyrrha took the left, the two of them flanking the table, culinary weapons drawn. Ha! Ruby yelled, leaping over and striking down. The confused expression on her face said no one was there. Behind you, Ruby! Nora yelled, warning them just in time to engage the two teens, who leapt from beneath a different table. Had they crawled all the way there? Pyrrha spared an eye for Weiss, who rushed her partner before her own attention was taken by the calm face of Jaune, a man who had more questions about him than answers. But his combat skills aren't in question, Pyrrha thought, easily deflecting his baguette with her own before chambering her strike to his back. Except that he dropped his weapon the moment she hit it. Below, a plate of beans launched up into her face. She cursed and fell back, wiping them away as instinct screamed to duck. She learned to trust them long ago, hearing more than seeing something pass by overhead. How like him to try and blind her. She growled and swung fiercely at him, taking a second to wipe her face clean of orange when he backed away. Weiss had reached Ruby. The two engaging in a fast-paced battle, Pyrrha was at least confident Ruby could hold her own in. Her own opponent watched her with a small smile, not at all concerned by her reputation. But where were his teammates? Intruder! Nora yelled, leaping from atop her tower to stab a metal post into a watermelon, swinging it like a mace. Blake Belladonna stood before her, smirking with a chain of sausages hanging from one fist. Nora should be fine. She had stamina and strength for days. It was the last one she was worried about. Ren fought as best he could, giving ground at every moment as he tried to keep Yang Xiaolong, one of the strongest fighters in the school, at bay. A lesser person would have fallen in the first exchange, but Pyrrha knew Ren was smart. He'd fought a tactical retreat, trying to divert and distract rather than to actually defeat his opponent. Even with a chicken on the end of each fist, Yang was closer to being armed than any of them. Her fists still hurt. The blonde before her warned as she tried to disengage and rush to her teammate's aid. Your fight is with me. You don't have a weapon. she pointed out, looking down at his bare hands. What's more, do you really think you can hold against me? I don't have to. Pyrrha sighed. He was right, of course. And it wasn't exactly a strategy she hadn't faced before in group competitions. Someone would try and keep her busy while the other members of their teams tried to defeat her allies, letting them attack her together afterwards. A valid strategy, if a little sacrificial. It hadn't worked then, however, and it wouldn't work now. She lunged forward, cutting down towards his neck. Jaune backed away, but she followed through with a reverse lunge, scraping breadcrumbs across his shoulder. Oh, whoa! He yelped, leaping back into one of the low tables. She cut at his feet, keeping an eye on his chest as he leapt over the blow, kicking a bowl of peanuts towards her face. Her hand knocked it aside, utterly wishing she had a shield as she pushed through the rain of nuts, cutting again at his shins. He dashed down the table, wood hammering beneath his gut and plates of food rattling and falling off with loud smashes. Pyrrha sighed and leapt up, chasing after him. He was running towards Ren and Nora anyway, and she knew failure to give chase would have had him double-teaming one of them. She'd seen his fights. As underhanded as they were, he was someone who would try to win at all cost. She hated that, but she couldn't help but respect it. His blue eyes glanced back at her as she sprinted across the table, a brief grin sending a flicker of concern through her as he leapt high into the air, landing in a 2-footed tackle, except facing away from her. What was that supposed to achieve? She found out a second later. He crashed into food, plates, and abandoned drinks, kicking them into the air and creating a cloud of liquid, foodstuff, and assorted detritus behind him. Pyrrha's eyes shut as she passed through it, only for her to yelp as something solid struck her stomach, launching her off the table. Pyrrha? Nora shouted. I'm fine. She called back, opening her eyes in time to catch her opponent's cheeky grin, a cracked watermelon dripping from his hands. He led me in, created a smokescreen knowing I would have to cover my eyes, and then attacked me the exact moment I passed into it. Had he planned all that in advance? Or was it something he'd come up with on the spot? Jaune was dangerous. She would not make the mistake of misreading him twice. Over to the side she heard Ren yelp, wincing as he was sent rolling back into some tables. For a moment she feared he was out, but several apples came buzzing out of the smoke, one exploding as it hit Yang's arm. Nora was doing fine too, swinging her mace as the quietest member of Team Jazzberry dodged and weaved away. Ruby cried out. Pyrrha glanced aside in time to see her partner trying to halt her sprint to no avail. Weiss grinned, carefully stepping back as Ruby slipped on the wet floor, her momentum sending her shooting like a bowling ball into the wall. Wait, wasn't that the floor beside where they'd just been fighting? You planned that, Pyrrha accused, noticing the shine of water on the floor. It was the drink he kicked up with his sliding. Weiss must have led Ruby into it, which meant she knew full well he was going to do it. One of them, and she suspected it was him, had figured out the weakness of Ruby's semblance. More speed and momentum was not always a bonus. Good job, Weiss, he said, getting a proud and a nod from the white-haired girl. Pyrrha tightened her grip on her baguette, glancing down and picking up a small metal serving tray to act as a shield. It was time to get serious. She had a partner to save. Time for round 2? He asked. You didn't do so well the first time. I'm a professional fighter. She chuckled. I'm used to people trying to rile me up, Jaune. You can stop that now. I had to make the effort. He grinned. Weiss kinda ordered me to. In her defense, it's not a bad plan. Yeah. He shrugged. I said you'd see through it though. If she asked, I'll say I was very upset. She rolled her eyes, now prepared to lose. She kept her footing as she charged him this time, cautiously preparing to disengage if he pulled some trick off. He was unarmed, the watermelon having fallen to pieces, but that meant little. On a battlefield like this, weapons were everywhere, and he was very creative. He dodged along the side of the table, grasping some cold soup with one hand, but she didn't allow him to blind her this time, taking it on her shield. A relentless assault was her best option, stepping forward and launching a barrage of blows that hit him more often than he dodged. Pyrrha's eyes sparkled as she noticed yet another watermelon on the floor. She wasn't sure why they had so many, but she took the opportunity to show him he wasn't the only one who could adapt. Flicking it up with her foot and kicking it against his chest, he fell back with a grunt, back slamming against the table as he looked back in horror, noticing how and where she was hurting him. He was cornered now, grasping behind him for a bottle of ketchup which he squeezed defensively towards her. "Sod it," she sighed. "I'll have a shower after." Taking him out so she could help her team was more important. "Crap," he yelled, holding both arms across his face as she lunged for the final blow, only to find herself held back. "Do you need me to do everything for you?" Weiss asked, standing before him with a swordfish held in one hand. Her other was flat against its head, trying to push her attack back. "Ah, thanks, Weiss," he gasped, pushing and rolling aside. Weiss pushed her off, snapping the baguette in two with a swipe of her fish, flicking it towards Pyrrha's face a moment later. The champion fell back, rolling across the floor as the sharp point struck down where she had been a moment ago. Weapon. She needed a weapon. A cucumber surfaced, a lot shorter than she would have liked, but at least solid enough to put up a fight against the fish. Back on 2 feet and with her footing once more, she was able to divert Weiss's weapon aside on the next thrust, closing into her guard and slamming the tray towards the girl's face. Pale eyes widened, only for Pyrrha to be brought off guard when a foot slammed into the back of her legs, tripping her over. "Thanks, Jaune." Weiss nodded, the two of them standing before her. Their teamwork was a lot better than she would have expected. "Pyrrha!" Ruby cried, rushing to her aid. "She's all yours." Jaune grinned, tossing the ketchup he had over to Weiss. She looked at it, smiling wickedly. "Here," she said, passing him the swordfish in return. "You could use this." "Ruby," Pyrrha warned, "slow down now." It was to no avail. Even as Pyrrha pushed herself up, she watched Ruby's eyes widen, the girl backpedaling as she tried to stop herself. Weiss open-ended the ketchup, kneeling down as she squirted it across the already slick floor. "No, not again!" Ruby screamed, shooting across the floor as though she'd been fired from a cannon. "Ren!" Damn it. Things were going from bad to worse. Pyrrha flipped up and back, launching her weapon at him as she picked up another baguette, falling back to the tower in order to regroup with Nora. They could still bring it back. She was used to facing whole teams on her own, and her teammate was a powerhouse she doubted Blake had an answer to. Jaune chased after her, rolling en route and coming back onto his feet with a trail of his own alongside his seafood. Did he even know how to use a shield? She'd never seen him with one. He knew. She figured that out the moment he used it to slam her guard open, lunging forwards in a move that would have ended the fight then and there, had she not all her training and experience. She spun aside, flicking out to cut a line across his brow, only for her eyes to widen as he leaned back and launched his tray at her. That was her move, right down to the way he spun into a crouch, chambering his next attack and following after. The shock was enough that she nearly didn't block it, falling back under the assault. When she did knock it aside, she had to deflect his attack with the back of her arm, wincing at the stinging pain as he pushed by and caught his shield once more. He even mimicked her twirl at the end, falling into a stance that was so obviously her own. Anyone else might have missed it. It was impossible for her to. Is he mimicking my style on purpose? That couldn't be so. Hundreds had tried, especially after watching her fights and seeing the fame she attained. Some managing varying degrees of success, but her shield throw was something unique to her. Not because it was hard to do, but because regaining her shield at the end of it was something she used her semblance for. He didn't have that, but even then he knew exactly where it would fall. Why would he even know or use my stance if he doesn't normally have a shield though? Something wrong? He looked and sounded confusion by her sudden shift. Pyrrha shook her head and smiled, dispelling her frown. So, he didn't even realize he was doing it. That was interesting. Either way, it wouldn't make a difference. He wasn't going to be able to beat her using her own style. That would be like trying to fight Ruby with a scythe. Pyrrha dashed in, trading blows as she pushed him back, only to marvel at the way he seamlessly fought her, despite being noticeably slower and weaker. It's like he knows how and where I'm going to attack before I do. In fact, he is. His arms are moving to block before I move to attack. She was starting to see why people found facing her so frustrating. But more than that, she was starting to enjoy herself. It was clear Jaune didn't care about winning or losing. The competitive edge present in her tournament opponents just wasn't there. And she loved it. It was a carefree fight, one with no stakes and nothing riding on it. There were no fans, agents, or sponsors critically watching on. A wide smile cut across her face as she pivoted and drove an elbow towards his, nodding as he pushed it aside at the last second, trying to slam his shield into her. Laughter sounded as she increased her pace, and it took a second to realize the laughter was her own. He grinned too, their weapons slowly falling to pieces as they clashed against one another. It was an admirable effort, but he couldn't keep up the pace. Not under her blistering and sustained assault. His technique, her technique, was flawless. Yet his body and stamina couldn't match. Soon his back was against the tower they had created, ready to be cut down. Which was right when Blake appeared beside him. Nora charged in a second later, chasing after her foe. But it was with wide eyes that she watched Blake and Jaune share a calculating look and a quick nod. "Nora, no!" Pyrrha cried. It was in slow motion that she watched a watermelon cut through Blake, the clone vanishing with a silent fizzle. Nora's attack was delivered with such power that it continued through, however, smashing into the stacked tables with horrific, predictable results. She tried to leap away, only to gasp as she felt a pair of arms wrap around her waist, Jaune having abandoned his weapon to hold on to her. "Nope," he said, grinning as he brought them both to the floor. There was an almighty crash as the furniture fell atop them. "Betrayal!" Nora shouted from somewhere beneath it all. "Sappers, traitors, shoddy architects, I want them all banished from my realm." Pyrrha rolled her eyes, conceding defeat as she let her head fall back. It was dark, what with the tables pinning them down. But there were light, and with the aura the damage was non-existent. Looks like we lost this one. That wasn't such a bad thing. She couldn't help but feel it had been fun. Losing had been fun. I did it. The boy above her laughed. And was it her imagination? But his laughter sounded so light, so carefree and childlike. It was honest enough to make her smile, to share in his happiness. "I did it, Pierre. I actually beat you." And his smile was so wide, eyes sparkling as he looked down on her. But that wasn't what caught her attention. "Pierre?" His expression fell, face turning ashen. "What is the meaning of this?" A familiar voice cried out. And suddenly, her skin went white too.